Hello, welcome back to Snugglewood, young Dreamlynx. My name is Aryan. Snuggle down into your coziest quilt and let tonight's calming tale, soothing sounds, relieve you of any worries and guide you towards a deep, restful night's sleep under these beautiful stars above. And so our story begins in a place called Hearthstone Hamlet and the sleepy giant tale of Giant's Library. The Giant's Library was unlike any place in the world. Tucked away in the heart of a sprawling mountain range, the library existed as a quiet sanctuary, hidden behind the veil of time and towering trees. Its walls were made of carved stone, adorned with sprawling ivy that caught whispers of the breeze. A vast dome crowned the structure, its surface capturing the changing hues of day and night. Beneath this dome lay an infinite collection, shelves that spiraled upwards, vanishing into the dim glow above. The giant who had curated this treasure of knowledge moved through the halls with great care, his steps a language the library seemed to understand. He was no ordinary being, nor was he simply a collector of books. The giant had wandered for centuries, his heart drawn to stories etched in paper, tales scrawled by hand, and the magical spark of wisdom shared by countless lives. He found refuge in each binding, his devotion sealing the sanctuary with a radiance that defied modern touch. The air within the library carried a sense of endless twilight. It wasn't stagnant, it was alive, a medley of pages turning, the whisper of leaves shifting lightly outside. Light filtered down softly from the crystalline skylights, guided by ancient spells that ensured the parchment below would never dim, no matter how much time passed. The library felt timeless, its essence neither old nor new, but as if it had simply always been. Each corner of the library had its own character. To the east, there were dense corridors where books chronicled the stars and their journeys, texts exploring the motion of galaxies and the stories of constellations. To the west, folklore and myths wove entire worlds into existence, the shelves spilling with narratives long lost to the tongues of man. To the south lay the journals and accounts of wanderers and dreamers, their emotions immortalized in the handwritten scroll sprawled over brittle pages. To the north were the tomes of wisdom, the discussions of philosophies, truths that blurred the edge of possibility. The giant had no name, for his life was measured not in the passage of time, but in the weight of stories he carried. He moved with an innate tenderness that belied his formidable size, as if each step obeyed not the force of gravity, but the reverence he held for what surrounded him. When he reached for a book, his fingers, large enough to crush a stone, would glide over its spine with the same precision that an artist may apply to brushstrokes on a canvas. One evening, a calm silence covered the library as the sun's last light pooled on the dome. With his quiet rituals complete, the giant wandered towards a particularly old section to continue his reading. Here the ink was thick, and the stories told were those nearly forgotten by time. He found a book in deep emerald, its cover bearing a symbol faintly glowing under his touch. He carried it to a sprawling stone bench carved into the base of a towering shelf. The bench fit him perfectly, for it had been shaped by his hands many eons ago. Opening the book, the scent of aged parchment and lingering magic greeted him. Within its pages, the story unfolded of an ancient forest where the language of trees lived on, laced beneath bark and root. Words spilled across the page describing intricate rituals of connection, guiding those who entered to listen to the flow of life beyond their own. It spoke of bonds between light, land, and living wisdom. Immersed in the tale, the giant almost seemed to merge with his surroundings, transforming into a monument of stillness. Hours might have passed, or days, but in this sanctuary it mattered not. Time was merely a flowing river, and he allowed it to pass unnoticed as the story filled the vast chambers of his mind, soaking into the quiet depths of his being. Each night that passed, the giant returned to pages not yet explored. Through this process, as he sat absorbed in myriad stories, his mind often wandered into worlds written down before him, bridging the space between the observer and the observed. He became part of what he read. No longer was he merely a custodian, but a traveller exploring the intricate pathways of imagined and unseen realms. Within the silence of the library, he experienced these journeys fully, crossing lands, seas, and skies without once leaving his sanctuary. But the library was more than a repository of knowledge. It carried an energy, an enduring sense of purpose. It wasn't merely to preserve stories, but to hold them, nurture their existence, and ensure their continuity. The books here had an eternal life, their voices sustained by the giant's watchful presence. He tended to their care as one might an endless garden, nurturing the roots of imagination to grow beyond ages. There were sections of the library more dimly lit, less explored, for even centuries couldn't allow the giant to absorb all that lay within these walls. Though he had combed its vastness with devotion, unknown sections still felt tucked away, waiting for the time they were ready to be discovered. Occasionally, in these quiet spaces, he encountered pieces of delicate wonder, writings so vividly poetic that they seemed to hold echoes of their creators' voices. He could feel the intention behind the scrawled words, sense the heartbeats that long ago propelled the ink in flowing lines. connection was unparalleled. Through these intimate bonds, the stories transcended ink and page to reach into the essence of life itself. Not all books carried joy or adventure. Some told of grief, hardship, and endings. Yet even sorrowful stories folded into the library's whole seamlessly, their weight forming threads that intertwined with the overarching narrative of existence. The giant held no sadness for these darker tales. Instead, he saw them as testimony to resilience, reminders of how deeply the world could ache and yet continue forward. One particularly quiet evening, as the atmosphere grew still, the giant paused amidst his evening ritual. He could feel something, a shift in the silence that was so tender, yet present enough to draw his attention. He stood, lumbering slowly to one of the less trodden sections of the library. These parts often called him in moments when balance shifted, in times when an unseen need surfaced. It was as if the great building spoke in the only language it knew, an unspoken pull that the giant innately responded to without hesitation. He reached a dark corner where the texture of the shelves gave off a cooler energy, untouched by wandering light. There, nestled like hidden treasure, lay a book encased deep in hemp texture, its cover unassuming except for a faint string of golden symbols etched into its clasp. Whatever story it held, the giant knew it had not been opened for countless moons. The air surrounding it was thick, charged not with urgency, but with an enduring patience, waiting for the right moment. A bridge for someone who could carry its meaning forward. Carefully, he lifted the book and retreated to a quieter nook of the library, where no distraction met his resting form. Cradling it between massive palms, he opened it slowly, the weight of the moment settling into his presence. Page upon page painted an image of beginnings, a world shaping itself for the first time, resonating with unimaginable possibility and wonder. The story stretched endlessly, telling of cycles and connections so vast that they rendered even the largest of beings as but one quiet note in the melody of existence. As he delved deeper into the boundless pages, the reader was transported to worlds beyond his own, filled with characters and creatures that defied imagination. He lost himself in tales of love, loss, and triumph, finding solace in the familiar feelings evoked by each turn of phrase. Hours slipped away as he devoured chapter after chapter, mesmerized by the power of words to transport him to places he had never been before. Beneath the flickering glow of the library's ancient candles, the fractional creak of wooden shelves seemed to harmonize with the muted schlup of turning pages. The air was heavy with the scent of old parchment, ink, and a faint sweetness that seemed to linger perpetually in the hallowed hall. Each book opened a portal to the unknown, and with curiosity guiding his every move, the reader allowed his hands to wander the spines of the immense shelves. He marveled at the sheer diversity of their sizes and bindings. Some tomes were so large they required both arms to carry, their covers etched with gilded runes that moved in the dim light. Others were no bigger than his palm, compact but dense, as though they held secrets too powerful to be encased in larger form. The reader reached for a slender volume, its cover adorned with an embossed silver tree whose branches seemed to stretch beyond its hemp bounds. The book opened with an audible sigh, as if it had yearned for centuries for a curious soul to finally release its magic. The words leapt off the page in dancing arcs of light, and suddenly the reader was no longer seated, but standing on the edge of an endless meadow, painted in hues of golden sunlight and emerald grass. Here the world felt alive in ways he couldn't have imagined. The wind carried whispers of distant songs, and each blade of grass seemed to soothe with its own quiet tune. A group of towering beings, their forms translucent and adorned with veils of silver mist, ambled gracefully across the horizon. They seemed to move in harmony with the land itself, their steps planting bursts of wildflower in their wake. One of the great beings turned its gaze towards him, and though its face lacked traditional features, the reader felt an overwhelming sense of warmth, as though the entity had smiled with its very essence. "You must be the wanderer who seeks understanding." The being's voice resonated not only in the air, but within the chambers of his mind. Before the reader could respond, the whole world shifted once again. He was back within the library, the book still open in his hands, even though its vast power now contained itself within the written words once more. Breathless, he set the book aside with reverence, realizing that the library was far from ordinary. It was a realm of gateways, each book a bridge to another place and time. He continued his exploration, drawn to a corner of the library where the shelves rose so high that the topmost books disappeared into shadow. Here the air was cooler, and a sense of ancient stillness pervaded. A single pedestal stood in the centre of the space, atop which rested a gargantuan tome chained to the stand, as though it held knowledge too dangerous to be unwatched. The reader hesitated, but felt a compulsion he couldn't ignore. When he opened the tome, stars burst forth. Not literal stars, but glowing points of light that created constellations, seemingly drawn from the fabric of dreams. Each star at his fingertips pulled him into an intricate tapestry of stories, and he became both observer and participant in tales of mythical beasts soaring through crystalline skies and fading like breaths upon a mirror. Yet there was peace in this immersion. The stories, vast and profound, paradoxically grounded him as he realized how interconnected they all were. The triumphs of heroes, the tragedies of fallen kingdoms, and the unyielding force of time became threads in the binding of existence. He reflected on how these tales mirrored the struggles and joys of his own life, and those of others he had known. Finally, weary yet fulfilled, he closed the great tome, its chains reattaching themselves with an audible click. The library seemed to nod in approval, as though it acknowledged his respect for the knowledge it safeguarded. The reader leaned against a nearby shelf, letting the experience settle within him. He gazed around the library, his heart swelling with gratitude for the sanctuary it provided. Even here, in this seemingly infinite realm, the warmth of the library reminded him of home. He thought of the sleepy giant of lore, the library's keeper in whispered tales, who was said to slumber beneath the floorboards, dreaming the stories into being. The giant's presence was subtle, barely perceptible in the stillness, but the reader imagined he could feel a faint, steady flow, like the heartbeat of the world surrounding him. For a moment, he contemplated staying in this magical place forever, lost in the comfort of its endless wisdom. But just as the thought crossed his mind, a distant bell chimed softly, a sound that felt less an alarm and more of a little reminder. The reader knew it was time to leave, though he also understood that the library would remain a part of him, etched into his soul. He rose from the chair and began to retrace his steps, offering a final glance at many shelves and the treasures they held. The words, the world, and the wonders of the library had nourished his spirit in ways he hadn't known he needed. He stepped through the towering arched doors, their carvings glowing faintly in farewell, and into the stillness of the night outside. The reader paused, looking up to find a sky full of stars that mirrored the constellations he had seen within the library. Each point of light felt like a fragment of the stories he'd just experienced, as though urging him to remember that the universe itself was a narrative unfolding. Smiling, he took a deep breath, turned toward home, and carried with him the quiet assurance that whatever lay ahead, he would always have the solace of the stories behind him, and the promise of those yet to come. The reader hadn't taken more than a dozen steps when a strange, lilting rumble reached his ears. It wasn't unpleasant. No, it was melodic and soft, like the sound of a lullaby woven through the shuffle of leaves. Curious, he stopped and turned back toward the library. The ancient building loomed in the moonlight, pillars stretching like gnarled fingers to the sky. Its massive wooden doors, as still and solemn as they had been when he first entered. But the sound wasn't coming from the library itself. It seemed to be drifting from the forest beyond, a dense thicket that framed the library grounds. Feeling a tug of something he couldn't quite name, a blend of curiosity and an inexplicable longing, the reader hesitated, then found his feet carrying him forward to the source of the sound. The grass beneath his boots shone with dew, and the cool night air seemed to envelope him in whispers, urging him onward. The forest was alive with a quiet magic that tensed and thrilled his senses. The trees stood like silent towers, their trunks thick and ancient, their branches crisscrossing overhead in an intricate lattice that barely allowed moonlight to filter through. Shadows wavered here and there, but the noise was steady, growing somehow brighter, as though a sound had taken on a radiant quality. He followed it deeper, his heart a steady beating that echoed the life of the earth beneath him. He soon came upon a clearing, bathed in a sensational glow. At the centre stood a peculiar structure, a stone archway, circular and carved, with swirling patterns that reminded him of the constellations he had seen painted on the library ceiling. Moss and ivy crept up its sides, softening the cold stone with lush green life. But it was what lay beyond the archway that left him breathless. The space beyond the arch wasn't the forest he had just been walking through. Instead, it seemed to open into another world completely. The scene opened up with colours he couldn't quite name, dreamlike hues that shifted and danced like the surface of a rippling pond. Mountains floated in the distance, their peaks hidden in clouds spun with gold, while streams of liquid light meandered through valleys dotted with crystalline trees. A great, sleepy calm seemed to settle over everything within, as though time itself had slowed to a brief whisper. The sound seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere all at once, wrapping itself around him like a familiar melody, long forgotten but now effortlessly recalled. Entranced, the reader stepped closer to the archway, his hand outstretched as though to touch the moving veil of light. The moment his fingers met the air within the circle, warmth bloomed in his chest, and an instinctive understanding washed over him. This was a gateway, though to where he could not say. A soft rumble startled him, and he pulled his hand back, glancing around nervously. The ground beneath his feet felt steady, but the sound was unmistakable. A low, lazy groan, as though the earth itself was stretching after a long slumber. Then, from the edge of the clearing, parting the trees with an almost delicate grace, emerged a figure of unimaginable size. The giant was unlike anything the reader had envisioned. Towering, yes, but with a softness to his presence, as though he carried the weight of many, many moons with a quiet dignity. His face was kind and ancient, etched with lines that seemed like they could tell 1,000 tales. Wisps of silvery hair framed his features, and his eyes shone with the same glow as the archway. Deep pools of shifting colours that held the wisdom of countless lifetimes. The giant knelt slowly, his massive torso moving with a surprising elegance, until his glowing eyes were level with the reader. With a soft wave of his hand, the archway dropped and dimmed, the colours melding into a tranquil dusk. The air grew quiet, peaceful, as the reader felt their eyelids grow heavy, lulled into a serene slumber by the comforting presence of the timeless giant.